welcome everybody. I wish to welcome everybody that is joining us today. Before I proceed to introduce Ernst, I'd like to mention a couple of housekeeping issues. One is if you have any questions, please post them on Q&A. If I can answer them, I will. Then otherwise, we're going to post those questions to Ernst after his presentation. In terms of the CPD, we having a little bit of a challenge at the moment. EXA has changed the rules and the way they grant CPD points. So we are engaging EXA and we hope that we will get CPD points or CPD accreditation for this talk. But as it stands at this moment of time, we don't have accreditation, but nevertheless, as soon as we have cleared the way and we have acquired the accreditation, then we will share the reference number with everyone. Debbie will do that on behalf of the structural division, and you will receive an email with the relevant reference number, which you can use in claiming your CPD point. With that, I'm going to welcome Ernst. Ernst presented his presentation before. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues, and kindly he accepted to present it again because many of the participants in the last presentation couldn't join us, and we were receiving many requests that we repeat this workshop, this technical talk, and here we are. For those of you that maybe don't know Ernst, simply put, and this is exactly what he said I should say, that he loves timber. He's been in timber industry and involved in timber business for many years. He has served on various engineering advisory committees and SABS technical committees. He has been involved in writing the standards and setting guidelines through Institute of Timber Construction. And we're really privileged to have him today here. And I'm looking forward to listening to his presentation, even though it's going to be for a second time. Thank you with that. And I hand over to Ernst.
Thank you, Paiman, for the opportunity. And I'm just going to put my video down for the purpose of the signal from my side. People, as we start, if you hear the word timber or let's say a structural failure in the industry, everybody is concerned. And there's really a negative side to it in the sense of the loss of life, the possibility of the loss of life, financial loss and destruction. But I think there's one thing that we overlook, and that's just my personal view, is that we don't share this information or the outcome of any failure really from the Engineering Council. Also, we make sure that we inform the people regarding the failure, because I think we can learn quite a lot from it, and we are actually losing that opportunity. And from my side, I think we need to not overlook this, but think about this whole thing. Can't we benefit from it? Can't we help the industry about it? So that's just my feeling about it. But let's start talking about the causes for timber roof structures to fail. People, as I said last time, we're only going to touch the tip of the iceberg. This is a discussion that can be for a few days if we really go through it. Okay, so let's just take a look at the objectives that we want to achieve for today. In the first place, quickly a review on the legislation. Secondly, a better understanding of the truss industry. Thirdly, what is the reason for roof failures? Then how to prevent these roof failures. And what is the involvement of SAICI to help preventing these roof failures? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the legislation. We all know what is really the purpose of legislation is to protect the home builder and to promote a uniformity relating the erection of buildings. and we need to apply it. And really, it's to the benefit of the end user, of the person that spent the money. And that is to help him and to keep it, that he receive a structure, a safe structure at the end of the day. So let's first take a look at the first legislation from the Building Act. Any residential house to be built in an area under the jurisdiction of a local authority falls within the scope of the National Building Regulation and the Building Standard Act, and the regulation make in terms of that act. Okay, so that is in short, if you fall in a municipality area, you need to comply to this regulation, the National Building Regulation. Secondly, if it's a homeowner, we all know that in terms of the Housing Consumer Protection Act, Measure Act, all home builders must register with the NHBRC, and all new homes must be enrolled at least 15 days prior to construction. So that's for a residential house. And the next one that most of the people overlook, and that's very, very important, is the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the 2014 construction regulation. And this helps because you cannot build a structure and never maintain the structure. So somebody needs to make sure about it. So there's really a rule about it that you need to comply to the construction regulation. Many people differ from me, but I did find out, and I did really invest this, the national regulator and compulsory specification, Rudolf Opperman, did confirm that we need to comply, all structures need to comply. It's not only public buildings that need to comply with this, and not only in the time of the construction, it's all over. Now, if you just read through it, inspection of that structure are carried out periodically by a competent person in order to render the structure safe for continued use. B, that the inspection contemplated in paragraph A are carried out at least once every 6 months for the first 2 years and thereafter yearly. If you go to number 3, the structure is maintained in such a manner that it remains safe for continued use. And lastly, the records of inspections and maintenance are kept and made available on request to an inspector. So if anything happened in that structure and the health and safety guy asks you for these register, you need to have it at hand for you. Okay, so very few people are using this, and this is to help the end user that the structure stays stable and safe. Let's just take a look at the people that regulate and control this. In the first place, it's your A19 inspection. We now change the focus now to the roof structure, and this is why I'm going to refer to roof structures from now on. Your A19 inspections, you need to have an appointed professional or professional person that do these inspections of the roof construction after it's erected. Okay, so that's the first guy. Then we go to the local authority. The building control officer has got a duty that in his jurisdiction, he take control there. And then we go to the NHBRC inspector, and he also have a duty that he need to comply to. Lastly, the Department of Labor inspectors. So these guys can get out to your place at any time, specifically your public buildings, and they can ask questions regarding these records that you need to get. Okay, let's take a look. The reason why I cover this part is very few people, specifically in our industry, is aware of this. If you want to comply to the building regulation, you only have 3 methods to build a roof structure. It's actually 4, but the one is nearly the same as the other one. A rational design or a rational assessment. If you look in part A of your National Building Regulation, SANS 10400, they will explain to you exactly what is a rational design, where do you comply to it, and how, what do you do about the rational design. The next one that you can use to construct the roof structures, you can use the deemed to satisfy in part L. You've got a table 9 there, and table 9 will guide you, but we'll talk a little bit later on it. And lastly is your agreement certification. So if you want to construct a roof structure in a municipality area, and there's many people that say, yeah, but a farm or a small holding is not part of it. As soon as you start paying taxes, you are part of that municipality and you need to comply to the national building regulation in that area. So let's just take a look at the first one, the rational design. I include two pictures here. The one is a prefabricated truss and the other one is a hammer beam truss for a post and beam. Both of them is a rational design. So the first one is, so the main reason is many people are under the impression that it's only nail-plated trusses, co-planar trusses, that's a rational design. You can design anything. You can design site manufactured trusses, also a rational design. So you're going to design all the connections, but mainly if we refer to a rational design, we refer to prefabricated trusses by the systems. Okay, let me just quickly take a look, just to give you guys an indication. If you're not aware of this or you're not familiarized with how the truss industry works, at the moment we've got 3 systems in South Africa. Now, if I refer to a system, I'm actually talking about a supplier of design software and everything that go with it. The nail plates that they design, the connections, all of that is supplied by that system. So they oversee that whole industry in the sense that they train the designers. They make sure that they follow all the rules. So it's a well-regulated industry. Now, the 3 systems that we have in the moment is Unilam, Mitec, and ITS. Okay, Unilam and Mitec use the limit state design in their design, and ITS use the allowable stress design. So all these trusses need to comply to the SANS 1900. So if they manufacture it, they need to follow the rules. So it's a well-regulated industry. And as everybody talk about the steel industry, we refer to the Red Book or the Red Bible for the steel industry. Here we refer to the 10243. That is the Bible for the timber industry. So if you're going to place yourself as a professional in this industry, you need to know those standards. You not only know it, you need to know it well. Otherwise, please don't start signing for these structures, because there's quite a lot of differences between the rational design or the 10243 and the 10400 Part L. Okay, so this is the first one that we're going to discuss, the rational design. Then we go over to the deemed to satisfied rule. This is self-manufactured trusses. And these trusses are manufactured accordingly to SANS 10400 Part L, Table 9. The limitations are a lot here. So you cannot design a girder. It's a maximum span of 8 meters. There's a specific truss configuration that you need to follow. There's a specific connection detail at all the members. It's a Howie configuration, and they've got, a Howie configuration for each of these span differences. So your limitations is 8 meters. That's your maximum span. Only gable to gable. No hips, no valleys, no girders, nothing. Okay, and at the end of the day, it needs to be inspected by a competent person. So that's your second option, how you can manufacture these trusses. And lastly, you can go to the agreement certification. So this is it's a certificate that confirm fitness for purpose of a non-standardized product. What I'm using here, I'm actually using the CMA truss, as we refer to it, the Concrete Manufacturers Association truss. It's a truss that was developed specifically for Category 1 building. And you can also see there, if you look at the detail of this truss and you try to rational design it through the standards, it will not pass. It's been tested by CSIR, and as I say, it's specifically designed for the Category 1 buildings. So your deflection limitations is not the same as the others, just a simple one, the deflection. For this truss here, all the members, the fin configuration, all the members is 38 by 76s. It's spaced at 900 spacing, and your battens is a 38 by 38, or let's say 36 by 36. Now, everybody in the truss industry know that a tile roof you cannot space at 900. You can with Billigong, but with pine you cannot, because you're going to get a deflection problem and also a bending strength problem with that spacing. But for them, it was tested and accepted by the industry, and we all know it's for the RDPs and so on. So it's a very strict, also in this, let's say, design that's controlled. So it's not just a matter you manufacture that truss. There need to be a specific plate size on it, all the materials, and then you can, so that's your agreement certification. You get it a lot on other products, like for instance your yo-yo tanks and all of that. So there's no standard at SABS that you can buy and do the design, and that is why they do agreement certification on it. And most of these agreement certifications also got a time limit to it. So it's not a matter that you send it once and can use it forever. It's got a 10-year or so limitation to it, and then it needs to be retested again. Okay, so those are the 3 ways that you can actually manufacture a truss. So that just gives us a bit of a background if we refer to trusses in the industry. Okay, now we go to the next part. What are the reasons for roof failures? Now, as I say, people, we're just going to discuss the general. We can go in depth on this, and there's a lot of, this is just my view, and I've got independent roof inspectors that work with me, and you know, we've been for many years in this industry, so this is just my view and the group of people that work with me. Okay, in the first place, the main reason is the application of the building regulation and the standards. People don't use it. Okay, now here I'm going to refer to professionals, and please, it's not a finger pointing to some people, but what I want to say to you guys, if you decide to start signing for roof structures or design, then you need to have a good understanding of all the standards. You cannot go in this industry. Unfortunately, we sit with people that sell signatures, something that I don't like to say over the webinar, but unfortunately, that's what happened. They just sign and they give you, for $1,000, they give you a certificate of compliance, and they've got no idea. And this I'm saying specifically as we go for these assessments, a lot of them, a professional did sign for it, but it's totally undesigned, it's incorrect, erected on site. So sometimes I just ask myself the question, did anybody inspect this structure? So please, people, you're welcome in this industry, but you need to understand all the standards, and you need to work with a truss manufacturer that you start getting background of it. You need to work with the ITC. There's a lot of sources, but do yourself a favor. Don't try signing for timber roof structures if you haven't got an idea how it works. The main thing is it's a brittle material. It is not as indigenous like steel and like reinforced concrete. You haven't got that safety with you. So a tension member, brittle, a compression member, short, there's a bit of a ductility, but it's mainly your tension members that start to break, all the connections that start to break. Okay, let's go to the next one. Many building departments at local authorities and NHBRC offices are dysfunctional. Also something that I don't like to say, but it's reality. Specifically, if you stay in the countryside, in these small villages and so on, the building control officers got no idea about roof trusses. NHBRC officers, if you put a query through, they just say to you it's job creation. So that's not the way it's supposed to be, accordingly to all these legislations. And then we go to the ignorant of the home builder. Unfortunately, these people, they don't get informed by the architect about their responsibility regarding maintenance and maintenance inspections and all of that. So they've got no idea. They just accept the builder. If he say it costs $10 and this is what I can do for you and the price sounds right, then they just use the guy, but they've got no background. So that's the kind of experience we've got in the countryside. In the metros, it's a bit different, but also there's a lack of control at this stage. That's just my feeling. Okay, then the next one I'm using here is a lack of strength in the design, insufficient bracing to secure lateral stability and member stiffness. You can see on these 2 pictures that I include here, it's the same. The one is inside the vault, and the other one you can see there's 2 spans here. You've got the left side, right side, same span, and then the center part where the span increase. But you can see the one side of the roof structure, it's nice straight lines, properly braced and so on. On the other side, where the span increase, you can see there's a bracing problem there, huge bracing problem. the main thing is we all know that the bracing function is to keep the truss vertical, and the most important one is actually to give you lateral stability for your compression members. You can see there the lateral deflection on those trusses as we measured was over 300 millimeters. So it's quite a lot. So the next thing is your plates will actually pull out of the connections, and then the roof will start fail. You can see also at the bottom part where your axial forces are more near your heel. Look at the S shape there and the lateral bending there. It's purely because of bracing. But this is just another thing, as I say, keep in mind that the bracing rules for the deemed to satisfied is only to 8 meters. So if you don't have a standard at 10.243, please don't sign for anything more than 8 meter, like the Rational Design trusses. And a lot of the professionals just accept the plans as it is. You need to have knowledge of bracing if you start signing for roof structures. You need to design the bracing yourself without any assistance from the plans. And the reason I'm saying this is because if the system do a truss design, they do it in 2D, and then there's empirical rule for the bracing, and then they brace it block for block. That's how the software do it. So please don't just accept the plans, because a lot of these plans, and 99% is 100%, but unfortunately there's some of these plans that don't have all the information you need, or there's a lack of bracing. So that's why if you start signing for roof structures, you take the responsibility for the construction of it. You need to make sure you understand your bracing. Okay, I did include 3 slides here for wind uplift. So this is a lack of strength in the design, insufficient design strength with respect of environmental actions, in this case wind. You will see on this structure, it's only a part of the structure where the tiles is not on. And the main reason is underlay. It was an extension to a structure, and that part of the structure, the wind blow off the tiles. Now, the reason why I include this part is very few people understand really what is the function of underlay. The membrane performs a critical function in preventing concrete roof tiles from being uplift under high wind gust. It virtually eliminates the load of the concrete roof tile when experiencing an imposed uniform pressure difference between the internal roof space and the outside. So what it in short says is the underlay keep the pressure above the tile and underneath the tile the same, not inside the vault, because that's underneath the underlay. So that's the first function, is to keep that pressure the same, keep it on there. Secondly, it's a dust proof the loft area. So you don't get that dust later on, you know, on the ceiling and on the side of the ceiling, it goes through on the walls and so on. So keep the dust proof. Thirdly, it prevents your condensation runoff. That's the first function of it. And then we go to the last one, suitable for any pitch roof, and especially roof applications in hot climate condition, as it stabilized UV and heat. Okay, now, is it compulsory? Yes, it is compulsory. If you look at your supplier, it will tell you there a tile roof between a pitch of 17.5 and 26 degrees. It's compulsory, and then above 45. But from experience, I would rather advise you to use it on all pitches. The cost involved is not so much, but the benefit is huge. Okay, so this is the first slide. It's to do with wind and with wind forces. The next one, why include this one, is just to show you people that if you look at the picture itself, there's a lot of loose tiles, and it's purely because of wind forces here. There was underlay, but it was a huge wind force, and this is why if you comply to the technical detail of the tile supplier, you will see they've got a technical advice on this. Very, very few contractors doing this, but it's a requirement. Only category A, where it's an unexposed area, 2 courses and the overhang must be nailed. If you go to category B, you're semi-exposed, 5 courses and the overhang, you can see also in that lines there. In your category C, that your exposed area, fix all the tiles. This happened very few times, and this is what I actually want to say, people. If you are the appointed professional for the job, make sure that you get all this information and make sure that the contractor complies to it. Otherwise, you cannot give that guarantee. Okay, then we go to the last one that I want to just deal with you people. The building, in this case, the whole roof structure was after the weekend. The wind just uplift the whole structure with the holding downs and just put it next to the building down for us. Okay, and this was purely nothing wrong with the holding down. They did use the correct holding down, but it was a matter that the contractor did not close the gables, the building gables. There was a requirement that he close it, and due to the fact that he wanted the structure as finished as quick as possible for a draw, they left it for the weekend. And a day later, the whole roof was blown off and on the ground at that state. Happily, nobody did get injured due to it. But I just want to show on the next, you can see there, it was built incorrectly, your 6-7 layers down. You can see they did use the strap also. Nothing wrong with that. Just to give a bit of a perspective about a sheeted roof and a tile roof. If you really start talking about a tile roof, remember it's a heavy load. In general, we normally refer to you've got a bag of cement every square meter above your head. And that gives the indication inside because the guys know the weight of a bag of cement. As soon as you start dealing with a sheeted roof, you work with an umbrella. You need to keep it to the superstructure the whole time. And that's why your holding downs need to be properly. And please, people, be aware of it, that you cannot use wire for a sheeted roof. In part K, there's nicely explained what thickness of holding down you need to use and how deep in the superstructure you need to bind it and all of that. So please, always, your inspector cannot inspect the holding down for you. You will say, yeah, it's incorrect. Let's say, for instance, they did use wire for sheeted roof. He will say to you it's the incorrect one. But still, if you look at this certification, we said clearly there that we don't take responsibility for the holding down because we haven't got laser eyes that we can look inside the superstructure. So that is the responsibility of the appointed engineer for the project. Then we go to the next two. This is the bad stuff. At the stage that the people, or let's say the roof inspector, or the appointed engineer is going to do your roof inspection, there's no loading on it. It's just a structure with all the battens, all purlins, with the bracing 100% correct. And he give approval and then they start loading the roof. So, and then he's away. You don't know where they're going to place the solar geysers or the PV panels or all of that. So just keep in mind, the appointed engineer need to make sure that if it was not specified exactly where they're going to place the solar geyser on the architect's drawing, you need to make sure that those trusses is designed to take that load. The main thing is just keep in mind, people, this is reality, not only due to Eskom's performance. If you read the SANS 204, they specified there that only 50% of your water supply can be from electricity. The other 50% need to be from solar or gas or heat pumps or any other way. So just keep in mind that solar units is the reality. It's going to be on all the structures. The big problem here is, from my side, is these solar suppliers just put it on the roofs. It's an old structure. Just put it, and some of these stuff are heavy. We talk about 400 kilograms over that 3 or 4. Let's say it's normally 3 trusses or so, and if you start applying that load on that trusses afterwards and you reanalyze it, you will see it's totally under design. So you need to make a plan there afterwards, but that only happens. And what is the benefit of an annual yearly inspection is that you will actually notify the owner of this long before anything happens, so we can rectify it, we can do a remedial, and voila, everybody is happy. But the people are not aware of these annual inspections, and we need to inform the owners of these structures about it. As I say, people, it's not only for public buildings, it's for everybody. The PV panels also yet work nicely. We all know that one PV panel, I know the sizes differ, but it's normally about 20-25 kgs per panel. So if you also apply that load, you will see there's no safety for you. Sometimes it's under design. Okay, then another thing is also a reason for failures, a lack of strength in the design, self-manufactured trusses. When we spoke earlier, if you refer to a prefabricated truss or deemed to satisfy truss in accordance with 10-400 part L table 9, it's only an 8-meter span, no girders, no hips, nothing like that. So there they specify this pitch, the span, the truss spacing, truss configuration, method of connections. All of that is specified there, and you need to adhere strictly to it. Then it's acceptable. But in this case, you can see here, and this is exactly what I'm talking about in the countryside. Exactly. This is one in our small village that I did, that Pyman did help me. The NHBRC, those people just let this happen. And you can see there, people, there's no triangulation in the trusses. Look at the deflection, and they load specific areas of it. You'll see on another picture at the end where I show you how the structure look from the outside. It's actually a nightmare if you see stuff like this, because you know it's like a timing bomb that just waits something to happen. And then you need to convince people that stay inside it, it's just going to collapse totally and fall on your head and you're going to die. But this is our problem that we have due to municipalities that don't do their jobs. Okay, mistakes during the truss fabrication stage. Later on, it have an influence on the stability of the truss. People make a mistake with the timber size and the grade. It's not a big influence, but if you talk about girders with prefabricated trusses, they did use maybe a grade 5 instead of a grade 7. They overlook that part there. And then the next one, they use the incorrect plate sizes. Maybe they did not have it in stock, and somewhere they slip it through the control measures and so on. So it can happen that you get to site where it's only a plate on the one side, or it's two small plates, so it cannot transfer those axial forces and that bending through that area there. Okay. Then we go to the next part, and here I refer to the truss configuration, connection details of self-manufactured trusses. It's like that previous picture that I show you, people. We have problems there with it. People don't adhere to the regulation of deemed to satisfy, and they just build what they like to. And we really have a problem over the country about this, because you run to the municipalities, you go to the NHBRC, and the NHBRC just tell you it's job creation. And that's not their duty, just to give job creation. They 100% if they do that, but accordingly to the legislations. Oh, this is the bad one. Construct with hardware plates with our design values. From my side, I wonder why they ever allow a nail plate in hardware, because there's no design values to it. So what the contractor do, he just go there, he buy the reasonable price plate, and he just nail it. You can see on those plates there, it's only on the one side. I can show you some pictures here, and I can show you some roofs that come down due to these hardware plates. And this is why I've got, to be honest with you, I cannot believe they sell this stuff in hardwares, because it's like you sell a nail that can't do the job. This people buy anything just to manufacture a coplanar truss, but it's totally under design. It's just a mess, to be honest with you. Okay, what are the reasons for failures? Now we take a look, mistakes during the construction phase. And you can see this picture, the other one was on the inside. Can you see also here, the superstructure already did fail. They tried to prop it there and to rectify it, but it's a nightmare. It's in our small village, the pitch is too low. Everything that's wrong is in this structure on the inside. Okay, insufficient construction drawings. Here we go to the prefabricated trusses and contractors that they haven't got all the drawings that they're supposed to have on site, so the brace base is not constructed in the correct place. they did not use internal supports, or they did use internal supports where they're not supposed to use internal supports. And then you start getting later on where some of the members start failing because the whole configuration is wrong. Members that's supposed to be in tension accordingly to the design is now all of a sudden in compression without some lateral stability. So this is also a reason. Then your hip connections and your bracing details is not on site. So then you get the end result that's not correct. So if you're appointed professional or a roof inspector that's supposed to sign for that and you don't get all this information, you need to make the contractor aware of it, and you need to make sure that they comply to it. They construct it exactly accordingly to design, because the design was do it like that. All the brace bays at a specific place, and this is how the design complied to the standards, to that information. The next one, roof erectors do not understand the roof layout drawings. Sometimes you get to site and you won't believe the roof drawings is still in its plastic there somewhere in a vehicle. And the guides will just tell you, man, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing it for the last 20 years. And then poor principle during the construction of unskilled labor. We sit with a huge problem and with a big opportunity if we start skill the labor force that we have. We've got a lot of people that sit with our jobs. And if we start using our knowledge and we start with training, the whole industry can benefit from that, and over the long run the whole industry is going to benefit. So let's make that the opportunity. Okay, and then we've got incorrect connections, where the people in the hip systems, they use maybe a smaller cleat or a hanger or something like that, not accordingly to the drawings. That also happen. And there's, as I say, people, we just touch this subject. We can start doing a lot of case studies on this. There's many things that we can prove everything I'm saying here that I experienced over the last 20 years. Okay, as I say, this is exactly the same building from the outside, and we're going to discuss mistakes during the roof construction stage. Okay, in the first place, as we said earlier, maybe you didn't hear it, it's insufficient construction drawings that the people receive on site. So the contractor or the roof erector use a lot of his own skill to do it. The danger about it is that brace base need to be exactly on a specific place, because that's an assumption that the software use for the design of these trusses. And then sometimes you get that the people are using internal supports where they're not supposed to internal supports, and then your configuration, or let's say your forces through your members, change totally. Then you get your hip connections and your bracing details. So you've got insufficient construction drawings on site. Sometimes it happened that the people did not deliver it, or somebody didn't give it to the roof erector. So we just need to make sure about that, but sometimes it can be a reason. Okay, the roof erectors do not understand the roof layout drawings. And this is why I say the roof manufacturers need to spend time with the local erectors, roof erectors, and advise them. If you see a site where they are busy specifically with trusses that you supply, spend time with the roof erector and guiding, because many times we get that the roof fail due to incorrect construction methods or incorrect placement of bracing, of all of that. So that can happen. Okay, then we go to poor principles during the construction with unskilled labor. Unfortunately, we have a labor problem in our country. A lot of them are unskilled, or these people, they just try to survive and try to get a bit of money. So then you buy yourself a saw and a level and you start construct a roof trusses. So we need to guide, and we need to use the opportunity to make an upliftment in to get skilled labor at the end of the day. Okay, and then you get incorrect connections. So they use not the correct connection method, or they did not use the correct hangers or cleats at the correct places, and then it starts fail there. And as I say, due to the fact that there's no annual inspections, you actually get aware of it after the roof tiles start giving you the or you see a sagging in the roof or something like that, and then you realize that there's something wrong, and sometimes it's too late, and then we need to replace the roof structure. Okay, on-site alterations, as I said earlier, a lot of the truss manufacturers leave a short nip at some of the Mona trusses or something like that, and that is just to do that adjustment on site. Now, sometimes the people leave it, and then they feel the trusses don't fit or something like that. So it's still boiled down to one thing: training. That's the most important thing. We can uplift this whole industry if we work together, but it will cost from the professionals to work with the labor, with the workforce, the contractors, and so on. And then we will get where we want to be. Okay, and then the bad thing, incompetent roof inspectors. And that's why I say I call a lot of these guys just signature sellers. And sometimes if I start working out how much money they make, I feel I'm doing the wrong thing. I need to go in that direction, but that's not the way to go. So please, people, if you want to become a roof inspector, nothing wrong. You either do a course or you see that if you're a professional and you're an engineer or technologist, make sure that you understand all of these standards and you comply the standards, and voila, then you're welcome to do roof inspections. Okay, no maintenance on structures. This is one example I took here in Bethlehem that we have here, and you can see there that quite all that tension webs or that king post did fail, either in the connection or at the knot or something like that. But it boiled down to one thing: if the annual inspections was done, we could have identified this problem long before it go to this point. I don't agree with the assessment outcomes from other people about the structure, but that's just my own view about it. The main thing is, if the maintenance was correct, we did not have this problem at all. The next thing, material, it's like this one, material fail and the connections fail. The next one is roof leakages, specifically on these old houses where they've got sheeted roofs and those lead screws that they nail in with the lead washers are not working anymore. There's no maintenance. And what you experience as soon as you get into the roof, due to a lot of leakages inside the roof, inside the house, you actually discover that nearly all the purlins are rotten. And after the rotting of the purlins, it's going to be the rafters. And at the end of the day, we're going to replace the roof structure. The main reason why the roof structure is still standing is the sheet are 0.8 millimeter thick, and it's actually, it can stand on its own. You don't even need that. If the walls can uphold that horizontal force, it will stay there forever. Okay, cloak gutters and valleys still boil down to maintenance. If the gutters are full of mud or so on, the water is just running sometimes, specifically with these Tuscany style. It's a terrible roof truss to use because we get leaking problems afterwards, a huge lot of them. And then the guys don't clean the valleys, that also happen. And then you get your nice one, your contractor faults. You know, the plumbers, electricians, and your ventilation guys. If the web is in its place or in its way, you just cut it out, and that's how they work. So still come back to that annual inspections. If we were aware of it, we can rectify it. But if you start seeing it afterwards, when you get that deflection in the roof from the outside, it's already so far that you cannot rectify that problem with remedials. Okay, how do we prevent these roof failures? In the first place, good cooperation between the municipalities, NHBRC, and the Department of Labor, and the application of the building regulation. That's the main important thing. Sorry, I'm just going back to this point. People, remember, people that work for these departments are liable. So we need to keep them liable, because unfortunately, the building industry get a bad name due to the way these people are conducting their jobs. So we need to make sure that you keep them liable for that. Then we go to the architects, need to educate the homeowners on the application of the building regulation and the maintenance of the structure to secure a safe building. Sometimes the the architect don't need to appoint the engineer. Everything regarding the construction and the place where the structure are fall in the deemed to satisfied. So you don't need, it's not a rational design. Maybe it's just something, it's an 8-meter span, and it's a gable to gable. The foundation, the soil is of such that you can use the codes to design the foundation. So there's no engineer involved. So the architect's got a huge responsibility to inform the owner regarding his maintenance and all of that. So if we have the opportunity, of course, we need to do it. And you also need to supply a maintenance, not just register, but a maintenance guidance for the guy. Just to give a small example that I take, when you get to places and the person's got a chroma deck structure, you just say to you, oh, I don't have a problem, I've got a 15-year guarantee. And I said to the person that you read through all the technical, you're supposed to wash these chroma deck once a year. Are you aware of it? Otherwise, you're going to lose your guarantee. And then the guy say, oh, sure, I was not aware of it. But I'm just telling you all these. You need to comply to the technical guidance of the supplier to keep your guarantee. Okay, the next one, workshop in the design and construction of timber roof trusses need to be promoted to professionals, inspectors, and builders. And then the tertiary training institution should include the design and the construction of wooden trusses in their syllabus for timber engineering. I know they use a lot of these tertiary institutions they learn you how to design a joist, for instance. And I know Prof. Walter Birdsey, he did have a passion for this industry, and he's still involved in Unilam. So I know he did spend time with his students there, but I just feel that we need to go that step further in the sense of explaining to the students and to guide them through a part of the syllabus on the roof structure construction, plus the erection, plus the brazing. So there's quite a lot involved, but we can include it then, and we will have a benefit over the long run due to that. Okay, I see Marius Visagia. I've got one here. Maybe you can go to the others, but let's just deal with Marius' question. Marius, as an engineer, we need to supply a Form 4 to local authorities, but no design and supply company of trusses will supply us with Form 3, and I have a big problem with this. Okay, I think, Marius, from my side, what we can do is, and I'll take it up with Prof. Walter Birdsey of Unilam and also with the ITC. I know they ask us, and that is why I did put myself apart in Form 4, that I only take responsibility for the roof construction in accordance with the drawings that were supplied, because that's what you're actually doing. You cannot take responsibility for the design. The system take the responsibility for the design, not you at all. But what I'll do is, let me talk. Marius, you're welcome. I think you can ask Debbie for my email address. You can send me a mail and I will assist you with that one, and we'll get to the end of it. That you get all the assistance from my side and also from the systems. But hopefully I can, that's okay for you.
All right, Ans, there's quite a few questions at the start, which I think you may have lost on your side. I can go through them. Nico LaRue is asking, please explain the category A, B, and C. Does that refer to terrain categories in the wind loading code?
No, not to the wind loading code. If you go to Coverland or Lafarge or to any of the tile suppliers, they have this, what do we say? They have the technical guidance, and there they refer to a category A, B, and C. It's purely, you need to make the judgment at the end of the day from your side as the appointed engineer. If you take a look at the location of the structure itself, and you can see it's not in a build-up area, you need to go for option B or C. Okay, the saved one is C. it's fully nailed, but they're going to hate you. You're not going to get another job after that one. So rather make a judgment. It's from your side. If it's totally built up next to it, just take the 2 outside, category A. But as I say, that is your choice. But you can get assistance, and as I say, you're the responsible engineer for the project. Rather, it's your choice. Because you're the person that take the liability for the 50 year of that design lifetime of that structure itself. If the people stick to the maintenance inspections, and so it need to last 50 years. So it's your judgment at the end of the day. So I cannot tell you exactly what, but it referred not to category accordingly to the loading code.
Thanks, Ernst. We've got a question here from Kazamula. In most cases, design does not include roof anchors, and usually there is a statement indicating that it is the responsibility of the builder. Is this approach safe?
No, it's the responsibility of the appointed engineer. If there's no engineer appointed for that project, then it's the responsibility of the architect. Because you need to make sure that they comply to the National Building Regulation. It's not the roof inspector's responsibility at all. So you need to it's the appointed engineer for that project.
Okay, we have someone asking about if there are any roof design training courses. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think, Debbie, you're welcome to give him my email address. I would like to make contact and discuss it with him. I can guide him quite a lot on that sense. So he's welcome to contact me directly and we can talk about it.
Okay.
I've got I've got 3 here in front of me here from Adil Ramse. Our Billigum Trust is now a general, where is it now? Our Billigum Truss is now a generally accepted norm for roof trusses in South Africa. Yes, it is, because it's a custom graded material. It's not, so you've got all the mechanical properties of it, so you can do a design like that of it, and it's included in the software of nearly all the systems. I'm not sure about ITS, but I'm sure about Multinail and Unilam and Mytech. I'm sure about it. And even you can go further. You can actually combine the material. Remember, if you look at the mechanical properties of the Billigum, and you look at the properties in tension, some of the people that's clever, some of these designers, they use it for the tension webs, and they use it in that area, or for trusses, but sometimes in web, sometimes only in the bottom chord, because it's in tension, it performs very well if you compare it to pine. So yes, but the bottom line, yes, it is accepted as a truss, as a timber in the truss industry.
All right, would you like to go to the next one with bridge?
Yeah, then I've got why suppliers not providing an A19 client always ask us to provide the A19. Okay, remember what I said earlier, A19 is only a compliance certificate that's saying that the structure was erected accordingly to the design drawings or the construction drawings. That's A19. You as the inspector there cannot take the responsibility of the design itself. And that's why I say, if you're the appointed engineer for the project, make sure that you receive the manufacturer certificate from the supplier. And what I normally do is, if it's me, I ask them to get a certificate from, or let's say a letter from the system, that the system did check that design. And that just make your case much better on your side. So that's the advice I can give there.
Okay, does that answer Nico Leroux's question to explain
what is the difference
between?
No, A19 and a Form 3 is nearly exactly the same. The one is from the building regulation. If you take part A and you take Form 3, okay, we've got the new one now, 22, one that's a bit changed. So there is also a Form 3 and a part of Form 4. A19 is just, it's nearly the same. What Form 3 says, you take responsibility for a component of the structure. In this case, a roof structure, that's a component or element of the envelope, yes. So it's nearly the same what you say, but remember in the case of Form 3, you take responsibility for the design also. So you need to make sure that you get the manufacturer certificate from the truss manufacturer, and also that you've got a letter from the system that they approve that design.
All right, we still have quite a number of questions, so I think if it's okay with you, Ernst, we could maybe do like 2 or 3 more.
Yeah, no, I've got Benson here. If you like me to, I know Benson. Hello, Benson, how are you? And I see you advise the people for the ITC. Yes, you are 100% correct. The ITC has got wonderful courses. They've got most of the truss manufacturers actually ask the designers in the training that they do the basic and the intermediate course at the ITC. It's wonderful courses. I was also part of the one course many years ago. So it's very good material. It's the way to go. It's good to do it. Okay, let's see what else we have. I only have those.
All right, we have a question from Rob Forbes. Please explain how the plastic membrane virtually eliminates the wind load on concrete roof tiles.
You see, if the wind starts blowing, if you really think about it, the vault on the inside of the roof structure, it's got a negative pressure. On the outside, it's got a positive pressure. It depends from which side the wind is blowing. So what you can say is it prevented actually from that negative on the inside of the vault. That's why the membrane, it's actually cover that part there. So the wind that blow so it go in between the tiles and over the tile. So it keep that pressure the same. Not 100%, but that is why it's very near to, and that's why it's stick there. You don't have that serious negative impact of the vault of the truss. And I see Rowley is also talking here. Hello, Rowley. Good to hear from you. Approved competent person is not the same as appointed competent person. Act sign 2 and 4. Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that, but I think everybody here is aware of, if you take all the Form 2, 3, and 4, you can see there's an appointed engineer sometimes for the whole project, and if you don't feel happy with the fact of the roof itself, you don't have the knowledge about it, you can appoint the inspector or rolleller to do that part, and they only do a component of it, and he keep it as part of all his documentation for the appointed person for that project.
Ernst, I've got a question from Franz Kromholz. He's asked, you mentioned the use of the incorrect grade of timber as a possible reason for failure. How good, trustworthy is the grading of structural timber in South Africa?
No, it's really, they do an excellent job. Remember, we don't talk about black rocks, we talk about graded material. Remember, people, it's a natural product. It grow, of course, they test. It depends on the kind of testing that they do. If it's Billy Gum, they've got proof grading, so they test all the material. If it's visual graded, these people are trained to do those grading, but something can pass by, and that is why there's a lot of people involved in the manufacture and also in the quality control. So they make sure on the side of the truss, but it happens sometimes. And this is why I always refer back to these annual inspections. You know, if you do the annual inspections, you can easily identify a mistake and you can rectify it if you do it on a yearly basis. But if you leave the roof structure with they've got a COC from a roof inspector and accept it's going to last the 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, it's not the way to go. It's not accordingly to the legislation. So it's better rather to educate the owners that the annual inspection is critical and they need to do it. It's for themselves, because people, if you really think about it, this investment is your most expensive investment of a normal person. So if I pay R1 million, I'm going to look after that R1 million. If you look after a car that costs you 200,000, okay, maybe more, you wash it. Why don't you look after your house? Okay, let's go to the next one. Debbie?
Okay, Bridget is asking if they can hold a previous owner of a building liable for roof structure failure as a new owner who has inherited the problem if there are no recent maintenance records for the structure.
Young, I'm myself in situations like that. It's a difficult one to answer because I'm not a lawyer. And as I say, yes, in a sense, you can keep the people liable. If you look at the new act, the Consumer Protection Act, there is the person that sells the structure to you, let's say it's an agent or somebody like that, there is a sense of liability to that. So they cannot just walk away from it. They are liable up to a sense. That's why I say I'm not a lawyer. I cannot give you 100%, but please, it's not something that you just can accept. The people that sell it to you say, no, they haven't got any responsibility. You've got the responsibility. If you sell it, it needs to be in good, in good stand. If you sell it, the structure need to be safe. That's their responsibility. And also the agent that sell it to you, they need to do an inspection on that structure. They appoint normally structural engineers to do the assessment, and not signatures, guys that just give you a signature. I mean, real guys that do it for you. And this is the way to do. And if you really look at the reliable agent, that's a standard formality that they've got. They inspect the structure themselves beforehand.
Okay, thanks, Ernst. Charles de Klerk has got a very interesting question. He's curious to hear your thoughts on rationalizing the substitution of live load with dead load, in other words, solar panels on an existing roof which was not originally designed for solar panels, assuming the roof was properly designed in the first place. Are there any stats available for the number of failures caused in SA by the installation of solar panels after the fact?
I can say to you, that is why, and I think if somebody like Rowley talking here, or Prof. Walter, or anybody that was involved in ITC, it's very important that we start record all these findings, specifically now that we deal with solar panels and with the performance of Eskom and so on. So we're going to get much more of these problems. But if we get back to the live load and the dead load, remember, I think the guidance from the loading code is enough there to guide him through it. You need to put you cannot just say you need to put that dead load on it if you reanalyze that structure and redesign that structure, and to make sure if those members can take it, or that part of the member. But as I say, there's very few. There's about 5 people I know in the country that can analyze a trust for you from first principles. All the guys are addicted to software. And if you start talking about analyzing from first principles, they haven't got an idea about it. But I agree, we need to start recording these findings, and we need to build a database that we can analyze it and that we can make changes to the codes if required.
Okay, Ernst, are you fine to continue with one more question?
Yeah, no, I'm staying here in the countryside. We've got a lot of time. I'm constantly on holiday here.
Thank you. All right, Gerard has asked, he says, thanks very much for an interesting session. Do you have any advice regarding items to keep in mind when repairing timber roof trusses by means of jacking, propping, and replacing bad members with steel?
If you start, there's a lot of research in other countries. If you start Google, you go to General Google and you start typing in repairing methods of rational design trusses, there's nice guidance about it. So you can just go there, even if you want to use steel also. But if you start propping, remember, you just need to think about how the truss was in its original state. Members that was in tension, and all of a sudden you start propping now. If you start propping, you need to stiffen those members with T-braces or something like that, that it actually guide you to that whole area. So you just need to keep it in mind. But please start doing research. I find quite a lot of interested information that I myself use for remedials, there is material available in Google if you start Google about it.
Andre has asked, is the ITC still certifying roof erectors and roof inspectors? Otherwise, who is considered qualified to certify a completed roof?
Okay, remember what the ITC do is they audit the system and they audit the manufacturer. Even if the manufacturer work under the specific system, still they get audited by the ITC. So what the ITC do is they send the inspector out to the fabricator and they check it, the quality of the trusses, and they check it, the documentation, everything like that, and they give them a compliance. But then there's two things about it. The ITC is not, not all the systems fall under the ITC anymore. Unilam is on their own. I know they use the other one. It's IT something, but I'm not sure about it. They can phone Prof. Walter, but these people, the fabricators, still get audited. And if you've got a question about the fabricators, you are welcome either to contact the system directly or to contact the ITC or this other. I'm not sure. As I say, this did happen recently, so I'm not part of the systems anymore, so I cannot answer that question 100%.
All right, let's take our very last question. Tiens Berger has asked, related to standard fixing details when, for example, 2 nails in BCB or BCR or diagonal bracing, standard details need more than 1 nail. This is a problem when using 50 by 50 members as timber splits. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, it's a standard. If you look at the ITC manual, and on a 38 by 76, it's going to be 2 3-inch nails that we use. On a 1-on-4, it's going to be 3 nails that we use. That's a standard that we learn the guys to use. If you start analyzing it, you will see sometimes it depends also on the forces and the span of all of that. It depends on the lateral force. If you start analyzing it, you will see sometimes it passes with 1 nail, but you cannot allow 1 nail because they don't do it 100%. So that's why it's a restriction from our side that with the 3876 you use 2 3-inch nails with a runner and bottom chord runners and cross brace, and with a 1-on-4 you use 3 nails. That's a standard. As soon as you go, just keep in mind, people, that if you start going to a 50 material, you cannot work with the 3-inch anymore, because the part that go into the stiffener member that you want to stiffen, the web or the top chord or the bottom chord, so you don't get that penetration through that 3-inch nails anymore. So you need to change it now to a 4-inch. So just keep it in mind. It happened many times where the people use the purlins for runners. You can't use a 3-inch nail there because you only penetrate 25 millimeter, and that's not sufficient.
All right, thank you, Ernst. I just want to say to the delegates, if there are any other questions, please don't hesitate to email them to me. And then, Ernst, if we do get those, would we be able to send them on to you just to answer for us?
No, it's a pleasure. I will answer them for you.
All right, I'm going to hand over to Payman now to do the closing.
Thank you very much, Ernst, for really intriguing and interesting presentation. And thank you, delegates, for joining us. And apologies for a little bit of technical challenge that we had. But nevertheless, Ernst, I think I learned a lot today. And, you know, currently I'm looking at the roof, so I'm going to call you tomorrow and get more tips in terms of how to deal with the roof. It's a pleasure for me. Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to all the delegates for joining us. As Debbie mentioned, please, sorry that we couldn't answer all the questions, but drop an email to Debbie or myself, and then we strive to respond to your emails. Any other questions or points of clarity, please contact me. I repeat again, we having the difficulties in terms of acquiring CPD points because EXA has changed the process in terms of granting CPD, but nevertheless, Debbie is working on it. And as soon as we have the CPD reference number for this talk, we will send an email to all the attendees and provide you with the reference number. Thank you again, and thanks everybody. Debbie, I hand over to you.
Thank you, people. Enjoy the week.
Yes, and thank you so much, and thank you to the delegates for attending. Good evening all.